everyone to this panel from the World Economic Forum on responsible digital transformation for social impact. I'm Louise James. I'm a managing director at Accenture, where I co-lead Accenture Development Partnerships. And we focus on bringing the skills that Accenture has to address social and environmental issues in the developing world. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel here today. Firstly, in the middle, Neil Kenny-Geyer, the CEO of Mercy Corps. Neil described himself just now as a thorn between two roses, so I'll leave you to make your own determination. To Neil's left, Laurence Morvan, who is Accenture's Chief of Staff and Corporate Social Responsibility Officer. And last but by no means least, Lauren Woodman, the CEO of NetHope. And Lauren and I co-chair a working group for the World Economic Forum on this exact topic of responsible digital transformation for social impact. And this is part of the forum's wider initiative on looking at the fourth industrial revolution from a civil society perspective. So Lauren, if I could start with you. During the discussions that we've been having with the working group, I think given the pace of digital disruption and the opportunities that emerging technologies present, most civil society organizations recognize the need to transform, but the challenge is really how to do that in a responsible way. How would you define responsible digital transformation, and what are the key elements?
It's a great question, Louise. Thank you, and thank you for teeing up this panel to be able to explore that very topic. You know, I think there's a real challenge that nonprofit organizations and civil society faces in trying to balance the risks of moving forward very quickly, but then also perhaps creating harms that were unintended or unforeseen by doing so. And I think that's really a key element of how do we balance the desire and the demand to move forward quickly and address these social questions, whether it's poverty or climate change or displaced populations, as well as understanding what we're doing. And I think that really boils down to a couple of things. Are we looking appropriately at questions around data protection and privacy and the rights of the individual in the context? Are we skilling our workers both internally and externally, those in the field and at headquarters, to make sure that we are making appropriate trade-offs? And are we moving quickly enough to address those problems, but also really looking constantly for new opportunities and new connections that can accelerate that change? So those questions of partnership and really responsible digital development and balancing the internal and the external, I think, are critical.
And you mentioned skills. From the work that NetHope has done, what is your sense around the skills in the sector? Do they exist?
They definitely do exist, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about digital skills, and that phrase seems scary sometimes in the sector simply because digital skills makes us think of coding or being a systems architect. But really what we're talking about are the skills necessary to use technologies effectively. We actually did a survey earlier this year based on some work that we had done to customize digital skills for the nonprofit sector. And about half of the organizations that we surveyed said that they felt like they were well on their way to having the skills that they needed. I think the thing that was perhaps a little bit of a red flag was the area of biggest concern was around questions of risk and protection. And only 31% of the organizations that we surveyed felt like they had the skills internally to do good data protection, to understand the limitations of technology, to identify bias. And those types of things are ones that we really, really worry about.
Now that's understandable, and I think this sector obviously feels a strong pressure to be at the forefront and actually to be the ones leading on these areas. Neil, as an organization that is on this journey, do you relate to what Lauren outlined, and how are you moving in the transformation?
I mean, very, very much so. And so while I'm here, I really want to congratulate NetHope for the work it's doing and kind of elevating the whole sector. I think that's absolutely critical because, you know, I really bring the social change world, just like the private sector, we have to bring all the available tools and best practices to achieve our mission. And if we're not engaged in the digital world, if we're not using the right technologies, we're not going to build a better world. We're not going to achieve the aspirations that we all want to achieve. So I don't think we have a choice but to become 21st century organizations. And that means to be full in as organizations that use technology, that know we've got to develop the digital skills, but we have to bring the solutions on the front line. So for my organization, I mean, yes, we have to do this internally, but I get most excited about actually the solutions on the front lines and how, you know, we're using, you know, the latest technology to improve our analytics with machine learning or artificial intelligence, how we're using virtual reality to deal with trauma, particularly with adolescents, you know, how we're using all of the digital platforms to bring financial services to smallholder farmers, to promote the gig economy in Africa, even in places like Gaza. So I am, you know, I am all in, extremely excited, and my only caution is, Lauren's great about reminding us of this, is my only caution is we just need to be humble. You know, in this world, we can't think we have all the answers, and we always have to start with let's do no harm, but let's also remember, let's do some good too.
Absolutely, and you alluded to the private sector angle, and I wanted to bring Laurence in because actually when we look at the challenges, they're no different for the different sectors. And I know Accenture's doing a huge amount on responsible digital transformation. So it would be great, Laurence, if you could share our perspective on how we see it.
Definitely. I mean, when I was listening to you, Lauren, I was thinking, but it's absolutely no different to the key questions that our commercial clients ask ourselves. So basically, what I would say, what does it mean to be responsibly innovating? I would say one is to design with purpose. So it's really having a clear objectives, a clear business case about what do you want to achieve, whether it's better end user experience, whether it's efficiency in your processes, whether you want to tap into new markets with new business models, have a clear business case. And the second would be implement with responsibility at the heart. And clearly, some of the issues that we see is about resilience of the solution in terms of architecture. It's about embedding from the start key considerations around data protection, data security, cybersecurity risk mitigations. And I would say the skills is absolutely crucial because whenever you automate, you've got to think about what will happen to the people whose job might be displaced. And more than displacing of jobs, I would say it's the reskilling of people who are going to use the technology, which is really at the heart. And finally, you mentioned data, algorithm, etc. You know, how do we make sure that we build in the right algorithm, transparency, explainability, so that we check for the unintended consequences? So all of that needs to be from the design into the solution.
Right.
And Laurence, do you see the two sectors, if you think about private and civil society, do you see the sectors learning from each other?
I think there's a lot of lessons learned to be shared, and definitely we as professional services firms working on the two sides of the equation can be a factor diffusing those. I would say, I would call out three things. One is we've seen a lot of our clients experiment, lots of proof of concepts. And at some stage you need to move towards the industrialization phase. So how do you do that, I think, is one area of lessons learned. The second, I would say, is about how do you best structure your efforts? Because all those transformation requires multiple skills, right? For sure, the technology skills from architecture, new IT types of skills. But much beyond, I mean, you need new business skills, you know, different operating model, different processes. How do you measure the value, monitor the value? I mean, those are new skills. And for sure, design, starting from the end user customer perspective. I think those are also new techniques that we need to bring. And finally, I would say it's always a huge change management effort. So how do you reskill at pace? I think those are areas where definitely we can learn from each other.
So skills has come up multiple times. Lauren, if I could come back to you, for organizations that are on this journey and are worried about the skills within their organization, where should they start? What pointers can you give to them?
It's a great question because the question of digital transformation is so large. No matter what aspect of that you're looking at, the question of where do we start is always one. I heard a fascinating statistic yesterday, which I'm probably going to get wrong, but the gentleman was speaking and said, look, a third of the people that will carry you forward in digital transformation in your organization are already working for your organization. And so this question of reskilling who we have is really important because it allows us to build on employees that already understand our culture, understand our mission, and so how do we make sure that they have the right skills? I think the first thing that organizations need to do is understand where they are. You know, it's very hard to measure progress if you don't know exactly where you are. There's lots of tools out there to do that. To do one, we have one, lots of organizations have one. But then I also think that, you know, to Laurence, to your point, the question of where are we going, that really helps us define what skills we need. I do think there are some that sort of go across the board. You know, these skills around collaboration and being able to work in a disparate environment, you know, where we're all working in different locations, having great communication skills, learning how to really drive for results as opposed to just thinking some more about the problem. All of those are skills that, if we're going to move forward, are ones that we need to have, regardless of where you are on that digital transformation journey.
So the softer skills are just as equally as
important. The softer skills are tough.
Yes.
They are.
Neil, if I could come to you, how are you approaching this from a skilling? Are you partnering? Are you doing it all in-house?
It's all of the above. So we are partnering with external organizations, groups like NetHope. We're partnering with universities. We're partnering with the private sector. And we have our own in-house training education program. We just build it into our leadership development programs. And again, in an effort to demystify, again, I think these are the kind of skills that we're going to need to be successful organizations to achieve our missions. And so we need to demystify it a bit and say, just as we used to train on certain basic skills before, these are critical. But a lot of them do have to do with, you know, how do you work better in teams? How do you work remotely? How do you use the digital world to, you know, enhance your collaboration? Those are critical. And ultimately, I think it does get back to culture. Mm-hmm. You know, I come from the view that, you know, culture eats everything else all the time. And if you get the right culture, most everything else follows, including the transformation we want to see in the new world.
Absolutely, and we've been talking a lot at Davos this week about the importance of trust,
right.
And now that's really the new currency. So Laurence, if I could just finish with you in terms of skills element, how is Accenture approaching skilling up our own workforce?
Yeah. So a number of things. One is reskilling at scale, because we know we are a very large population at Accenture. Particularly around the new IT components, you know, we had hundreds of thousands of people to reskill. So we really leveraged digital as a way to multiply and accelerate the reskilling. So anything from digital learning boards, connected classrooms, gamifications. I mean, all of those are techniques that really help to accelerate. So that's one thing. The second thing, back to what you were saying, it's really also a lot about culture and new ways of working, new ways of thinking. And here we've deployed a new approach to consulting, which embed much more, how do we co-create with our clients? How do we start more from, how do we embed innovation? So techniques like design thinking. How do we work much more in an agile ways, you know, more in sprints? So all of those are new techniques, but there are really more new mindsets that we need to embed. And then as every companies, I think we've had to also recruit, you know, deep experts in specific fields, and then they can build the teams around. So I would say those would be the three levers.
Thank you. Well, in closing, if I could just ask you all to give just one piece of advice about, as organizations are setting out and thinking about how to transform in the digital context, but to do it in a responsible way, what would your one piece of advice be, Lauren?
Oh gosh.
Just one.
Just one. I think the advice I would have is to be brave. You know, it's hard work, but it is the right thing to do because it will allow us to have greater impact. And we shouldn't be afraid of the challenges ahead of us.
Great, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, that's great. I would agree. Be bold and brave, but also be humble. I think, you know, too often those in the technology world believe they've got an app or a solution to every problem. And when we know in today's world where we're being pulled apart and torn apart, where we're going back to the most narrow form of our identities, when conflict is driving extreme poverty now, you know, we have to remember that you know, the challenges are still the same. How do we as humans embrace shared society and believe that a diverse world that is highly connected, and that those tools can drive the better angels are what we want to strive for.
Great, thanks, Neil.
And I would say to start with the end user experience in mind, because at the end of the day, it's less about technology. It's more about how can we enable the end beneficiary, the end user, the customer, with a better ability to work and in an efficient way and in the best way. So start with the end user experience in mind.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your participation and insights that you've shared today. For those of you that are interested in learning more about this topic, we've just scratched the surface, as you said, Lauren. It's enormous. But there are other tools and organizations that are working a lot on this. A couple of suggestions: the principles for digital development that DIAL have developed, the work that the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data is doing. Accenture is working a lot around responsible AI and has worked with the forum along with other partners on an AI board toolkit. We've also worked with the Turing Institute on a fairness tool for responsible AI. And then finally, to come back to where we started around the World Economic Forum's work, I would strongly encourage you to go and look at the WEF's website. They launched the initiative on preparing the civil society for the fourth industrial revolution yesterday. And there's a white paper that you can find on the website. And there will be a future program of cross-sector learning and collaboration on this topic. So no shortage of challenges, but also no shortage of ideas and organizations that you can go to as you yourself go along this journey. Thank you for watching.